In the year 1192, the city of Acre rose in ivory-white towers along the Mediterranean. The air was thick with the scent of salt, cedar, and the mounting tension of the Crusades. Amidst the knights and merchants, two men moved with a singular, chilling intent toward Conrad of Montferrat, the king-elect of Jerusalem. For months, Conrad had seen these men. He recognized them as humble monks, quiet servants of the faith. He slackened his pace to greet them. In an instant, the monks produced daggers and thrust them repeatedly into his chest. As Conrad slumped from his mount, his lifeblood staining the ancient stones, the world learned a terrifying truth. One assassin was slain on the spot. The other was captured and dragged through the streets until he died. But before his breath left him, he confessed. He was no monk. He was no agent of the rival Ayyubid dynasty. He was a shadow sent from the cold peaks of the Persian mountains, an agent of the Order of Assassins. This was the nightmare of every king, sultan, and emperor in the medieval world. To face an army was one thing. To face a ghost was another. The Order lived in scorned seclusion, perched in castles atop jagged cliffs. Within the walls of their primary fortress, Alamut, the eagle's nest, elders recited Quranic verses while scouts trained in the arts of stealth, disguise, and anatomical precision. Legend held they were boys taken from local towns, drugged with visions of a lush paradise, and purged of the fear of death. They were the Nizari Ismaili, a fractured branch of Shia Islam, cast out from the sands of Egypt a century prior. Disinherited of their fortune and hunted as heretics, they had turned the mountains into a factory for the world's most elite killers. Their philosophy was a scalpel doctrine. The assassins didn't need to defeat an army so long as they could frighten or kill its commander. When the Sultan of the Seljuk Turks marched against them, he woke up one morning to find a dagger pinned into the hard ground beside his bed. A message from the Imam followed. Did I not wish the Sultan well? That dagger which was struck into the ground would have been planted in his soft breast. The Sultan abandoned his campaign. For 200 years, this psychological paralysis was their shield. But by the mid-13th century, the shadow was about to meet the sun. From the east, a new force galloped forth. Men who drank mare's milk and blood. Riders who carried the wisdom and majestic horsemanship of the steppe tribes. The Mongol Empire didn't use a scalpel, they used a sledgehammer. While the assassins initially watched the Mongols dismantle their Sunni enemies with alacrity, they soon realized that the great Khan recognized no shadow kings. The Mongols demanded absolute submission. To them, the assassins were not mysterious holy men. They were spillers of royal blood and killers of kings, a direct threat to the Khan's divine command to rule the world. Detecting this unstated animosity, the assassin Imam, Allah ad-Din Muhammad II, attempted a desperate gambit. In 1238, he sent a secret delegation into the heart of the West. His envoys passed through the humble peasant homes and taverns of Europe until they reached the splendid thrones of the kings of France and England. The message was a chilling prophecy. If the nomads from the east were not stopped in the Levant, they would soon reach the banks of Christendom. They proposed a Muslim-Christian alliance to halt the Mongol tide. It was perhaps the greatest what-if in human history. But in the English court, the Bishop of Winchester interrupted with a sneer that would haunt the future. Let us leave these dogs to devour one another, that they may all be consumed and perish. The envoys were sent away. Europe turned its back, only to watch in horror as the Mongols swarmed into the Rus, Central Europe, and Armenia in the years that followed. The opportunity for a unified front died in a room of arrogant silence. The assassins, realizing diplomacy had failed, struck first. Several men, possibly disguised as prisoners of war, infiltrated the camp of the Mongol general Chagatai and stabbed him to death in his sleep. It was a classic assassin move, designed to paralyze the horde. It had the opposite effect. In the Mongol capital of Karakorum, the great Khan monk was consumed by a cold, calculating fury. He ordered his brother, Hulagu Khan, to march west with 1/5 of the empire's total manpower. His orders were absolute. Treat kindly whoever obeys, but grind beneath the feet of your wrath those who resist. Hulagu's arrival in Persia made the mountains quake. He didn't just bring riders. He brought the industrial might of the East. He brought Chinese engineers, massive siege engines, and the iron radiance of a professional war machine. His advanced force, led by the Christian Mongol general Kitbuka, began striking the outlying Nizari fortresses. In the towns of Tun and Tus, thousands of Ismailis were driven into the open country and slaughtered, their bodies left in mounds of viscera. The assassin king of the mountain, Ala ad-Din, began to spiral into madness and paranoia as his impregnable world collapsed. In 1255, the internal rod of the order finally broke. Ala ad-Din was found stabbed to death in his own bed, murdered by his own inner circle, possibly with the approval of his son, the 26-year-old Rukn al-Din Kursha. The young Imam inherited a crumbling empire of shadows. He tried to negotiate, sending word to Hulagu that he wished to submit, but he was too afraid to appear in person. He refused to tear down the walls of Alamut, the sacred heart of his people. Hulagu was finished with games. He marched on the fortress of Maymundiz, a castle hewn into the side of a massive red cliff. For days, the mountainside trembled as Mongol catapults rained stone and fire upon the heights. Towers fell from the cliffsides like broken teeth. There were no shadows left to hide in. On November 19, 1256, Kursha descended from the mountain and surrendered. It was the end of an era. The Mongols swarmed the castle, and although a final band of devoted assassins fought to the last man in a desperate ambush, they were simply erased by the sheer volume of Mongol iron. Hulagu then used Kursha as a puppet, forcing him to ride from castle to castle, commanding his own people to disarm. By the dozens, the legendary assassin forts opened their gates. When they reached Alamut, the eagle's nest that had stood for 2 centuries, the garrison at first refused to listen. They rained down arrows upon the Mongols, holding the trails for 3 days. But the tide of history was against them. After negotiating a writ of amnesty, the garrison evacuated. Hulagu ascended the mountain himself, marveling at the mysterious lair that had defied the world for so long. He ordered it leveled. The Mongol soldiers scoured the secret chambers and set fire to the sacred libraries. The knowledge of the Nizaris, their philosophy, their science, their maps of the human heart, turned to ash. The iron radiance had consumed the shadow state. Kursha, having relinquished his lands and his people, was kept as a guest of the Khan. He was given a young Mongol girl to wed and treated with a mocking hospitality. But his value was fleeting. He requested an audience with the great Khan monk in Karakoram, hoping to salvage some fragment of his dignity. He traveled thousands of miles across the steppe, only to be turned away at the gates. Monk was disgusted that the fortresses of Lamsar and Girdku still resisted. He told Kursha he was no longer needed. On the journey back to Persia, the pretense of hospitality vanished. Mongol officials led Kursha away from the road into the wilderness. There, the last imam of the assassins and his followers were kicked to a pulp and put to the sword. Not a trace of his stock was left. As the chronicler recorded, he and his kindred became but a tale on men's lips and a tradition in the world. The order of assassins was dead. Their castles were ruins, their libraries were smoke, and their leaders were dust. They had mastered the art of killing the man, but they had met an enemy that specialized in killing the culture. The mountain kings had been erased, but for Hulagu Khan, this was merely the first task. The golden age of the Islamic world still stood to the west, centered in the lustrous archways of Baghdad. The most heinous massacre in the history of the Mongol Empire was now only a few hundred miles away. The path to the caliph was clear. The sledgehammer was ready, and the world was about to watch as the House of Wisdom was drowned in the Tigris.